The first thought-provoking session made us ponder on questions such as what constitutes gender justice and what does it leave out? What gender justice means in situations of crisis, and how can we rethink ideas of gender justice with regard to violence and with regard to the idea of the domestic. Gender justice is the ending of and the provision of redress for inequalities between genders. The term is rarely given a very precise definition. Concepts of gender justice that seek to enhance the autonomy or rights of one gender in relation to the other are often considered controversial and arouse intense debate. Gender justice includes some unique elements. Firstly, a vulnerable gender can never be identified as a coherent group, along with other sets of disempowered people. Secondly, unlike any other social group, relationships between genders in the family and community are a key site of gender specific injustice. And therefore, any strategy to advance gender justice must focus on the power relations in the domestic or private context. Thirdly, the structural inequalities that are produced in the private sphere are not simply contained there, but infuse most economic, political, and social institutions. Justice systems alone are not enough to address deep rooted structural inequalities that have been amplified by the pandemic. Our second session today, titled Support Services to Cope with the Shadow Pandemic, focuses on other systems and institutions that have adapted themselves to the needs of survivors amidst lockdown. Like Professor Rukmini Sen spoke to us, she spoke about the Hinsa Ko No campaign that was run in Mewat. It masked itself as a mask making drive and was an excuse actually to create an opportunity to identify cases of violence and abuse. Even during peak lockdown, volunteers would visit homes to provide the cloth and teach women how to make masks. But that was actually not the real reason for the Hinsa Ko No campaign. It was doing so because the most important cause of the visit by the volunteer was to inquire about the well being of the woman in the house. In British Columbia, specific approaches to clinical practice in the pandemic era and the resources adapted for the pandemic have helped frontline physicians assess risk of child maltreatment and support children and their families, and it has helped to recognize and respond to child abuse and neglect. In this session, we will hear our eminent resource persons who will share their experiences of providing support to survivors. I would now like to take the opportunity to invite Dr. Somdatta Ghosh to welcome and introduce our distinguished resource persons for this session. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Sriyoshi, for giving me this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome our eminent speaker and dear participants to this session. I am Dr. Somdatta Ghosh. I am very honored to be a part of this webinar and also this session. Now, I would like to introduce our eminent speaker, Ms. Shushmita Mukherjee, Director, Gender and Adolescent Girls, Project Concern International, New Delhi. Shushmita Mukherjee leads the gender portfolio of Project Concern International in India. As Director Gender, Shushmita works on an array of issues concerning the lives of women and girls in India. Shushmita has more than 20 years of experience in the development sector in program designing, program implementation, research, and evaluation. She has worked in the areas of reproductive health, girls' education, HIV/AIDS, health and nutrition, youth and adolescence, child marriage, GBV, leadership and empowerment, etc. Shushmita is passionate about integrating gender equality in all aspects of her work. She has worked with many prestigious organizations globally and nationally to provide her skills and capacities to improve the lives on ground, which include CARE, ICRW, Action India, Restless Development, and now PCI. Shushmita also facilitates a global subgroup on COVID and child marriage, an attempt towards generating knowledge and solutions towards addressing different forms of child marriage among girls globally, especially due to COVID and other crises. We would love to hear from our distinguished speaker, Ms. Shushmita Mukherjee. Now, I would request our renowned speaker, Ms. Shushmita Mukherjee, to move forward. Over to ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Shomdata ma'am, and thank you, Shreyashi, for giving me an opportunity to be part of this prestigious event, and also giving me the opportunity to share about my understanding and my learning from the COVID experiences. So I would like to share my views through a PowerPoint, so I can just present some my slides also. Give me a couple of minutes. I hope my screen is visible, if you can tell me.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So, thank you. And my dear learned participants, audience, listeners here, I would like to start my statement connecting with what Dr. Shreyasi also mentioned, that vulnerability exists across in our society and globally. And in patriarchy, women and girls being subjected to different kinds of abusive situations, their rights and dignity being violated, is not a new topic to any of us. With this basic understanding, that's the assumption that I'm having, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. We all know that, and as Madam also mentioned, that it got exacerbated due to the crisis caused by COVID 19. And it is very essential now for all of us who are in the social sciences, who are working towards understanding the lives of women and girls, understanding the lives of people, to actually take time, review, understand, and realize that what happened. Why did the crisis created another huge crisis? Totally unprepared to manage such crises, we followed many other developed countries and imposed lockdown. With the announcement of this measure to curtail COVID spread, the entire country got into crisis. And I would like to share how this actually led to the shadow pandemic, and also my experiences of how did we do any small thing that could be possible during this thing. So I would like to first that let's go through this ecological model here to understand the violence against women. I know all of you must be very much aware of all these things, but just to quickly put the context in place, this model being published by UN Women involves considering factors that contribute to the problem at different levels. The ecological approach is based on the understanding that factors at each level, the societal, the community organization, the relationship, the individual, they all mutually reinforce each other, either to make the situation worse or to make the situation good. So, gender inequality, which is the root cause of the violence against women, which is deep rooted in our patriarchal approach of functioning of our society, is the root cause because it is reflected in our social structures, in our social practices, and in our social norms, which we follow from ages to generation by generation. Now, here, now the COVID 19 coupled with this lockdown actually impacted at all these factors and made the violent situation much more vulnerable. The restricted norms got reinstated in our society. Let's look a quick snapshot at what did this lockdown do to our lives. You know, this lockdown led to millions of people overnight lose their jobs, lose their earnings, livelihoods, lost their residence, and they were completely on roads. The newspapers, the media was full of people trying, crying to regenerate their life, return. We know the lives of the return migrants that has been shown incessantly over the media. People and families got into food insecurity. The depletion started of their savings capacities, increasing workload, mental anxieties, everything. This is all what we got from from this lockdown. And what we lost access to services, access to essential health products, essential and any other products, social solidarity. Completely our social fabric got dismantled. The peer connect, the emotional support, the personal time for the self, and any other future plan for ourselves, for the family, the trust, safety, security, all got lost moment in moment. And the women's mobility, freedom, this all got curbed. This crisis affected women and girls in such a way that their world got shrunk in the four walls of their house. Many women were forced to stay continuously with their disturbed and violent partners. Children, adolescents, young people got thrown away from their education and agency development process, and they all got trapped in their own vulnerabilities. We know that globally, I'm sure everybody has got these things, that 35% women faced different kinds of violence from their partners. The helpline numbers were ringing incessantly as it has increased fivefold during the pandemic. But less than 40% of women who experienced violence actually got up to seek any support. There was a steep rise in the cases of reported and unreported early forced child marriage and sex trafficking. And the survivors had limited information and awareness about available services and limited access to support. So let's look at what happened at home. So I would like to talk about a study which was undertaken in 7 states of India by a network of organization led by Jagori Action India, Ekta Madurai, Nazariya, Vistar, Vimochana, NAN, and Sangma. And this study looked into the ecosystem redressal that mechanism that was available for the survivors of the domestic violence. And this study clearly showed that family is not a site of safe place. It could be a site of violence. The main message during the lockdown, the stay at home and stay safe, was completely reversal and wrong for these women, because at home at risk was their life. The COVID also made the shelter homes unable to fulfill their roles. They were anyway, first of all, were inaccessible. Many shelters soon reached their full capacity, and where funds were at short to really support all these lives. And we all know this crisis was so much unprecedented and unpredictable in its way, that there were no operating guidelines, no SOPs were available of how to function during such a pandemic situation. Access to transport, simple access to groceries, medical supports, all well at great hurdles. The shelter homes were really struggling to actually give support to all these survivors. Thus, India, since March 2020, suddenly got into another kind of vulnerabilities, because almost half of the population was unable to understand that what is happening. The National Commission for Women data shows 800 complaints in April and 2,000 plus in June 2020. Soon the unlockdown began. Soon, the survivors, the women, the complainants, the grievance people were able to come out of their house. They were eager to report. But we know how much is the access to telephone or the digital world to all our women in ground. But still, at least we got to know that women were in pain and there was an issue that was happening in their lives, which completely got aggravated. I must I must mention here once again to make sure all my listeners are sensitive and do understand that domestic violence or any kind of violence leaves a long term impact in terms of physical health, sexual health, reproductive health, emotional health, psychological health. And of course, it has a long term bearing on the impact on children and any other individual at home. And this pandemic caused all these impacts on women and girls in our society, in our country. I would urge my listeners to have the courage, go and listen to those survivors, listen to those voices, and sense the pain when they say, दीदी पेट की मार से तो शायद बच जाएंगे, 2 दिन नहीं खाएंगे तो भी जिंदा रह जाएंगे, पर रोज की मार, रोज की बेइज्जती से कैसे बचेंगे? Just to translate for some of my listeners here in English, the translation goes, Sister, we will be able to remain alive even if we do not have food for 2 days. But how can we be remaining alive because from this daily beatings and the robbing of our respect every day? These were the statements of the community women at one of the community feeding center in Jharkhand during the lockdown. So let's look down what were some of the challenges that we faced when we tried to reach out to these women. We all know that lockdown caused a tremendous limited, restricted movement. The fear of infection and lockdown rules had contained all of us in our houses, and us as service providers were also had limitations, and survivors were definitely, which we just spoke. Poor availability of means of communications with females. They just couldn't talk, they just couldn't reach out to. We know that in India, just 40% of women have access to phones, whereas this is about more than 71% in for men. However, the story of possessing the phone is very different from access. Access does not mean that you have the ownership as well. In one discussion, a woman mentioned, अगर किसी का फोन खराब हो जाता है तो मेरा फोन उठा ले जाते हैं, जैसे लावारिस पड़ी हुई है, पूछने का तो कोई मतलब ही नहीं बनता. Just to translate in English again for some of the listeners here, if any of the family members' phone gives troubles, they will quickly pick my phone, as if this is lying as an unclaimed property. It never happens that they will check with me before picking it up. So one may understand in such a situation that in rural areas, in remote and unreached and unconnected areas, access to phone is a big thing. And let's leave about if they can reach out to anybody or register their complaint over phone. Reduced contact to natal family or other family members or this family supports for any sort of support. Unavailability of the formal system in the immediate society. Fear of infection and lockdown made the neighbors also deaf and dumb. Shelter spaces, schools, all were converted into the COVID healthcare demands. And of course, we know that our system was also not prepared of how to respond, how to prevent, detect, monitor, address. Nothing was there. Everybody was only implementing lockdown rules, stay at home and stay at home. So this apathy of the system further actually aggravated the situation and didn't support anyone. So lockdown and the after effect of the lockdown is immense. As you may have been hearing that it is being said that actually it has caused a great reversal of any gains that we had made in understanding and progressing towards gender equality and equity. I would like to now talk about some of my learnings and how my organization Project Concern International could do any of or just something we could do, because this is a huge painful area, is a huge quantum volume dynamics and complex here. We at PCI, during our strategizing exercise, believed that life beyond COVID 19, the new normal, has to have women and men as equal partners. We need to ensure that during this time, women are gaining all the strengths to strive back, and all genders are working as partners in new normal phase. That was the dream, that was the vision with which PCI got into this job of domestic violence during COVID. We quickly understood and realized and learned from many other colleagues in the sector that telephone, mobile phones, or internet based services were the most viable route that was possible to connect to the communities, families, and individuals. Hence, most our strategies and actions initially were also rooted through these only, which I'll share now. So I must say that the soon we realized that we need to do something, as we started hearing the stories, as I just mentioned in my one of my previous slides. So we started that let's do quickly strategize, because we want to do a big picture so that there is a larger positive impact in the society. So what we could do to attend to the needs, we need to know how they are, where they are, what exactly they are doing, where, what if anything is still there as kind of support network that is available to them. So we got into the rapid exercise of understanding the ground situation, while a part of the team also got into the generation of messages and messaging for wider reach out. Of course, we knew the digital technologies available more to harness. And we also got into a close connect with the government, because we all know that the government has the widest and the deepest and the longest and the largest network to reach. So PCI works very closely with the government systems to ensure that we are strengthening their systems, we are strengthening, utilizing those networks to reach out, have the largest. And as I just show on this slide, we work very closely with the National Rural Livelihood Mission and the State Rural Livelihood Missions across many states in this country. So that will allow, so have a larger reach out rather than just investing your resources and energies in small pockets, which will not help the larger thing. I must say that when our telephone callers started calling, we first reached out to the frontline workers. And our calls were like ventilators to them. And one of the frontline workers said to us, when our caller called them that, hello, Didi, kaisi hain aap? And they said the response, Didi, pehli baar koi pooch raha hai ki main kaisi hoon. जिसका भी फोन आता है पूछते हैं काम हुआ, पर आप ऐसी हैं जिसने आप पूछा कि मैं कैसी हूँ. Just to translate quickly, as it's written on the slide as well, that one of the frontline workers says that I'm receiving calls from people checking about my work, but it is only you who has called me to really ask, how am I? I think that's very essential in any kind of crisis where we are trying to support each other, when we are trying to really understand what is that how am I, how are you? So during this situation, frontline workers became our route to really understand what is happening on ground, because any organization would be external to the ground, underground, to the on ground people. It would be very much alienating for the woman to really trust on whom to trust and whom not to trust. So that is why this is the mechanism that we will go through the proper channel, because the frontline workers are also belong to the same communities, and that will enable us to get the real deep understanding of the entire context. Similarly, when we started teleconnecting with the adolescent girls through these frontline workers only, we found that more than half of the girls were able to realize that something is not happening right. They are trapped inside the house. The schools are closed. There is no books. We know March, April are the session change and academic cycle timeline. Uncertainty, loss of livelihoods caused a tremendous change of behavior among the adult parents and adult members of the household, and which was all being brunt by these adolescent girls. They were receiving increased maltreatment, increased verbal abuse, neglect, negligence, and beatings also in few cases. And and when we asked what do you do, we go to the mothers, and then what do the mothers, they have also the same thing. So either the girls were getting into too much of silent zone or too much of violent zone, but everything within the household. So we can understand that not only the women but also adolescents were completely impacted by this entire scenario. Thus, while reporting the cases of the violence started, the National Commission of Women, along with the other state governments to the directions, started WhatsApp numbers. We know that, all the state commissions released WhatsApp numbers. So PCI, because we really wanted to have a larger, because that we have the acts and rules in our country for prevention of domestic violence, which says that it is the adult woman who has to come out and seek the support, seek the legal support. So that is why it is very essential for women to know all these things, where to access, what is it, whom to access. Today only there is a survey where urban women, in Times of India in the Delhi edition, in the urban women, they themselves don't realize that there are subtle ways how their rights and dignities are getting violated. Women themselves do not know that what is their right and wrong. So awareness is very critical. It is very essential for them to know what is the legal justice system available, what are the entitlements to them. And that's where we started our journey. So, thus we created small capsule sessions on COVID-19 and gender-based violence situations and other schemes that could facilitate such women to access support. We started reaching out through a cascaded approach. That means we trained the frontline workers and shared the digital materials to them, and then taught them of how to then further transact these sessions in a COVID situation to the other self-help group members. And the frontline members through this process essentially reached out to the larger women and started connecting, started the discussions. As ma'am was just now mentioning the Mewat project, Hingsa Ko Roko. So that's also similar. When you start conversing, when you start knocking the doors, when you say that you are available, when you go there with the kind of information, awareness, where to access, what to access, how much it is possible and how it is possible, that's where slowly the woman can pick up her threads and really say, yes, there is something, I can do something, and the confidence building starts. So that was the subtle way where we started intervening into their lives of those women and including the survivors. However, very soon we got to know this was not enough. This is not being enabling the survivors to really be out of those vulnerable situations, out of those abusive situations. So our next important strategy was the establishment of gender facilitation centers. So what was this? So at the gender facilitation centers, we started providing the services of telecounseling cum referral services. We know that the country under the Nirbhaya Fund already has the one-stop centers, the 181 services, the commission services, the police and all those things. So there is no point in again creating another system, a parallel system out of it. But it is very essential for these women to be linked to those services and start accessing these brilliant services that are provisioned for such women. So at the Gender Facilitation Center, I call it in short GFC, we started providing the counseling and referral services. And with the help of SRLM, we were able to actually advertise and spread across the message, the telephone numbers, and the women were also being referred by the frontline workers. So these were become accessible as we were basically entertaining calls from women and girls, convenience, affordable, no recognition, no social stigma, and anonymity. So we felt that this is the right kind of provision that we can do. And soon our counselors started receiving calls, lots of calls, different types of violence, different types of vulnerabilities. It's very difficult to, put together such a complex world that has slowly, as we are becoming more and more infrastructurally developed, digitally developed, communication, electronic, everything is developed. The life is also becoming complex, and the vulnerabilities are also becoming so complex. So in any way, these were the kinds of two major kinds of calls that we started receiving. Was the first on direct on the gender-based violence, and the how to access the social entitlements. So our counselors in this process, we ensured that all our counseling process is not leaving women only as, okay, you need to go to 181 or you need to go to police or something like that. So our counselors took a detailed method of conversation, because in any support, the conversation, listening to tell them that you have a way out of your trouble is a big thing. So it was essential that for our counselors to ensure that the woman is leaving the call feeling benefited, feeling empowered, that yes, her problem, her challenge has a ray of light and it is solvable. And that was a big effort and a big success to us as well, because we got tremendous appreciation also from the system and also from the callers. To ensure that there is a systemic arrangement and sustained change in the context, the COVID is still continuing, the new strains are coming, the scenarios of being the red zone and orange zones are still continuing, the schools are going to open and all these things, life is still heading to that, what is the new normal. So it is very essential to have a long-term sustained arrangement. So now I would say that we are now trying to put a convergence platform at the block levels. So this is a joint platform of where you have the SHG, that is the women's platform, we have the Panchayati Raj, the village local governance platforms, and the government systems of block level officials and agencies where the support system all lies. So as to come together, you should be aware. This platform is where they need to be aware that what are the kind of challenges that exist. Who are those women who are unable to still access the entitlement that is there, so that there is a joint decision making, there's a lot of accountability, so that we can question each other and ask each other where is the resolution, and there is easy to follow up. So this is something which we are still working it out, and we are yet pulled together all the pieces together, and PCI is working towards creating things so that it can be scaled up in wider geographies, because we are still piloting it into a small locality. So before I really end my thoughts, I would like to say that we need a long-lasting strategies in place which are resilient to such crises in futures. My dear young listeners who are all around, as one of my Didi said in the unlocked down, that now we know whom to call. Now we know that somebody is there whom we can just call. So it's like connect, talk, but remain aware of what is possible, what to access, where to access is very essential. As mentioned by one of the very senior gender expert in one of the developmental discussions, I would say that this is not a shadow pandemic. Actually, this is the pandemic. Look into the definition of pandemic, and you will find that gender-based violence is prevalent across the globe, generations after generations, hours after hours, gender after gender. This is all happening. Why doesn't it qualify to be the actual pandemic? This is the real pandemic. Gender-based violence affects not only individuals, it affects the entire development of our communities, families, countries, because the individuals make all of these things. If we are not individuals healthy, not only physically and mentally, spiritually in all sets, how will you build a country? What will our young peoples be all about? So before I end, I call upon all participants, all audience, now or later, to come together and break the silence on gender-based violence. Don't remain just a reader. Don't remain just a student and a listener. Please take action. Take action today. Take action immediately. Don't remain a bystander. With all these things, I would like to say a big thank you. Thanks to ICCSR and thanks to the Maulana Base College for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. We deeply enriched by your contemporary and valuable presentation. Now, we will go ahead and take some time for question and answer session. This session will be conducted by Mrs. Nandita Bhomik Chaudhuri. Over to Nandita. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. And thank you, Ms. Mukherjee, for an enlightening session and too many informations. We have been enriched, really enriched with your enriching speech. Now, a question that goes to you, Ms. Mukherjee, is: are the incidences of domestic violence more prevalent in rural areas than the urban or semi-urban areas? What do you think? Please share your thoughts and opinions with us.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good question. I would say no. The violence exists everywhere in almost equal matter. As I have been mentioning, the complexity, the kind, the format is very different. So we cannot say that any urban women are better or face lower violence and the rural women face more violence. No, everywhere it is the same. The vulnerabilities, the formats, and the kinds may be different. It's the same.
Hello. Okay. Okay. One more question, Ms. Mukherjee. According to you, how important is face-to-face crisis intervention? And how did Project Concern International adapt to the lack of face-to-face crisis intervention?
Sure. You are very right. See, in counseling, until date, because lockdown has not really happened in this way, as this pandemic came up as a health crisis where the human contact, the human touch became a big question and a big no-no. So that is why we all are connecting with each other through this virtual thing. So as I just mentioned in my presentation as well, that we also switched to the tele services. So both has its own advantages and disadvantages. Face-to-face counseling, you have to come. You may have the risk of being recognized. You may be seen by somebody. You do not know, you have limited mobility and all those things. So telecounseling actually gives the advantage of that if you have an access to the phone, the phone should have some balance, or if it's a mobile phone or something like that, you have the number, you can just dial and talk with anonymity, no social stigma, no recognition. So both has its own thing. But yes, many a times face to face gives those body language kind of support. But I would say that COVID has also given us an opportunity to really advance our telecounseling skills as well, where we have been very much successful in giving those supports, emotional and psychosocial counseling to the survivors, and have connected them to get the right kind of service thereafter. So both has its advantages and disadvantages, and I'm glad that COVID gave us the opportunity to adapt to the tele life.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mukherjee, for giving us the answers of the questions asked by our honorable listeners. Now, I would like to call Dr. Ghosh for introducing our next speaker. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Nandita. Thanks again, Ms. Shushmita Mukherjee, ma'am, for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again, ma'am. Now, I would like to invite our next renowned person, Dr. Anindita Chatterjee, CJC Coordinator, Clinical Psychologist, Peerless Hospital and Decoding Research Center, Kolkata. Dr. Anindita Chatterjee is the founder and director of Julian Day Institute, new mission, an inclusive school that caters mainstream curriculum to children with special needs, running successfully for 7 years, and head of Child Guidance Clinic, Peerless Hospital, and BK Roy Institute. She has obtained her PhD from the Department of Psychology, University of Calcutta. She has been a postdoctoral scholar at Roehampton University, London, and Fortis University, Netherlands. She has received the prestigious Erasmus Mundus Award from the European Union and the Endeavour Award from Australia. Dr. Chatterjee has received professional training on PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System, Communication Difficulties, London, professional training on Audi Blocks, Learning Disability, Singapore, professional training on ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, Australia, and completed courses on Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, CBT, and Mindfulness. She has been working with children with special needs for the last 25 years, has vast experience in teaching and research in the field of learning disability. Dr. Chatterjee has also authored several peer-reviewed papers and books. Welcome, ma'am, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are eagerly waiting to hear from you. Now, I would request our distinguished speaker, Dr. Anindita Chatterjee, to move forward. Over to ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such lovely words. I thank Moulamish College and the principal, Dr. Shamal Kormokar, for giving me this platform. And especially thanking Shreyashi Chatterjee, whom I know for a long time. She invited me for this seminar. I thank all of you and the audience who are in this platform as well. I will be majorly talking about my experiences during this lockdown. As you all know that I'm a clinical psychologist and I practice day in and day out in hospitals and clinics. So I have a lot of case studies which I came across during this pandemic, and I'll be sharing my experiences and some of the therapies and systems which we could incorporate during this pandemic sessions. I would like to add my PowerPoint. Just is it visible?
No, ma'am, it isn't visible. It isn't visible. Present in the present now option, if you do it that way, it's going to come.
Present. Yeah, I did that.
Ma'am, if you could speak and then maybe we once you can put it on, then we'll be able to see it. But if you could begin your session.
Yeah, just a moment, please. Okay, I'm audible, right?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. Um, I think some technical glitches. Never mind. I'll just start speaking because there's a time. So I'll start with that. Life never seems to be the way we want it, but we live in the best way we can. That's what we did during the pandemic. So there, if you ask me, there's no perfect life, but we can fill it with perfect moments, which we tried our best to cope during this pandemic time. Now, coming little bit to COVID, COVID has, made us feel a little bit calm. We have become, to some extent, we have become little casual because it is a continuous process that we every day we thought what will be the next day, how we are going to manage. So prolonged this tension has to some extent made some of us feel
Ma'am, we've lost your voice. Dr. Chatterjee, we are unable to hear you. So if you could just reconnect again, disconnect and reconnect, because I think there is some sort of a network issue. Ma'am, we can see you.
yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, thanks.
Uh,
So it has really yes.
Ma'am, I think it will be best if you switch off the video, because then I think your network is not so strong. So if you switch off the video, then maybe the audio will be clearer.
No, I
Your
already
voice is
switched off
breaking.
my video. Just a moment. Is it now all right?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
So, vaccinated children give us a guidance that we can do certain illogical situations, or sometimes it is isolation. We have become a lot of ideas, work, but still the whole able to vaccinate in such a way that yes, we could cope up. There are certain damage, devastations, delusions, but again we have become so confident that we could really work on it. What we have seen during this time is our disturbed mind. We have become disturbed not only as an adult, but even children are also disturbed, and we have found that lot of um, different mental health issues has cropped up with this. Uh, First of all, I will deal with the children which we found very frequently in our clinic and hospital, that the conditions in children are they are confined, they are very bored, they have become, some of the children have become very aggressive, they are so much anxious, there's dearth of sleep and appetite, there's lack of social contact. Homeschooling, although whole year the children have come across the homeschooling, but eventually we have seen that they are not enjoying the homeschooling system, which has led to childhood depression, which has given a lot of oppositional behavior. Whatever you're saying, they are saying no against that. And the most difficult situation is the suicidal ideations and thanatophobia, that is fear of death. These are the very common conditions we have seen in the whole of pandemic, as well as now also we are getting a lot of um, young adult college goers, even the children who are, only 7 8 year old, they are coming up with the fear of death, which is very very unusual at this scenario, which never has happened. At least I didn't have experience earlier of seeing children so young coming with fear of death. So what is required is the help from the parents, help from the counselor, help from the environment, from the society, from the parents, from the family members. All the child needs help. So we need to explain all these things to the children about the present condition, about the dress code system, like covering them with mask, taking enough precautions, and the most important is observing the child's behavior. Even it could be an adult college going or child, you have to observe the behavior of the child. And the family is very, there should be a family, all the family members should discuss, and then unusual behavior or any, if you have seen your child, please take additional. There is some structure in daily life. Uh, you can really the situations, and for that, screen time should be little on it, because already they are doing the homework. Uh, so for that, they are using the mobile or the tablet. laptop or desktop, whatever. Now, for the parents also, there is a lot of difficulties which we have come that parents are working from home. There's no time schedule. There's no when they go to office, they used to come back at 8, 9. There was no, but when they are working from home, it is 11, 11:30, 12. When a child needs little bit of parents' company, he or she is not getting that. So parents are overburdened, and a lot of parents have lost their job as well. And its implications has created real toil in parents' life, because many parents have to buy a laptop or a desktop for their child's schooling. There's job insecurity, there's marital discord, and a lot of lack of happiness which happened in parents or adult. So for them, the advice was that they should speak with someone uh, freely. Maybe it could be their spouse or their friend, whosoever whom they have confidence. They should speak up their mind with someone and get themselves little bit stressed. Then the eating and sleeping properly is very, very important. And they should make it that the work has to have a exit time, because it is very, very important for an individual also. They need little bit of relaxation and little bit of anxiety free life. Every individual should have some kind of me time, so that they can spend the time in their own way. Then viewing some videos of travel, which is very important. This gives a lot of satisfaction, lot of happiness when they see something, some place over the video. Then there should be work delegation. It's not that the female should work everything at home and the men should sit and do only the office work. There should be work delegation. Even they should share the work with the children as well. Then some kind of creativity which also enhances your mood, which also enhances your de-stress factor, that should be encouraged. And of course mindfulness is very, very important, which I'll come across little later. uh, it should be like a team, a home should be like a team. And each one should be responsible for some work or the other, not only the females but males, children as well. And certain time it is very important that they should stop blame game. You are saying something to your husband, or husband is saying something to your wife, or the child are being blamed for certain things. These should be avoided. Each one should take responsibility, including the child and the young adult, whosoever at home. Some meditation, some physical exercise, and nurturing hobby is very, very important. Now I'll talk about some of the cases which I come across during this time. Case one is Rahul, a 32-year married for last 4 years, started working from home. His salary was chopped and he became very quiet. His mood changed frequently, and for very small instances, he started hitting his wife. This is again a gender discriminatory thing, that uh, it's male chauvinism which has been hurt, and a wife is a soft target and she's being beaten up. Another case, Suman, a 28-year-old unmarried woman who lost her job and her relationship broke into, and she went into a deep depression. So this was like a child, a woman who had several years of relationship, but this was, hence she lost her job. her boyfriend's criteria was, one of the criteria was the job. So she lost the job and she lost the relationship. You could understand the significance of this case. Aslam, a 17-year-old boy, schoolboy who was extremely brilliant, after a happy day with family, had a dinner and hanged himself. There was no significant reason, or there was nothing could be ascertained why this boy was who hanged himself, and his mother was under deep shock. And her expressions were, when she came to my clinic, it was like nothing is penetrating her. She was so stoic. Uh, it was a real uh, job to make her again back to her life, with repeated sessions, with even virtual sessions, coming into the hospital, all became fruitful after, I think, after 3 months of continuous sessions. Um, Then another case is Mr. and Mrs. Roy, who came to my hospital. For both were working from home, and for very trivial things they started arguing, and followed by verbal and physical abuse by the husband. Uh, it was not like this before the pandemic, but post pandemic and after, when they started working from home, all these started. An 8-year-old girl saw her father hanging in his bedroom since the man lost his job. A 10-year-old boy developed severe obsession with cleanliness. He became so finicky that he developed rashes and sores in his hand. This boy, he always used different sanitizers to clean his hand, and it became to such an extent that his uh, soft skin, it turned into a very bad eczema kind of thing. So all these are the very real cases which I come across during this time. And the different strokes which we found in all these cases, that these problems were common throughout. It's not that I have never seen this kind of problem before. But this time, the mental makeup was different. The tolerance among the people were different. There were a lot of insecurity. Everybody thought, I will lose this, I will lose that. My job is into going down into drain. My child is not studying properly. My husband is losing his job. So everywhere there was a lot of insecurity, and there was a lot of unexpected fear, because we as a human being, we try to have certain plannings in our life. So everything came to a standstill, and there was a lot of irrational fears, and it at times it happened that life came to standstill. All the planning failed, and there were a lot of detachment from near and dear ones, because we as a human being have gregarious instinct. We cannot live alone. So all this really didn't happen at this point of time. Now, we did a lot of therapeutic intervention. We did CBT. It is a form of psychotherapy that focuses on how a person's thought, belief, and attitude affect their feelings and behavior. It is based on certain principles, like that unhelpful ways that people can think can lead to it can lead to various psychological problems. Then there was certain strategies which we developed to handle these cases. And cognitive behavior therapy is not only listening, it is because there is a difference between psychotherapy and counseling. So counseling is more or less it's talking and listening, but cognitive behavior therapy, it is something which the new habits formation, which relieves the symptoms of physical and mental conditions. And it is very, very important that individual learns how to cope with that particular situations. Then there is mindfulness. It is also a type of meditation in which you focus on being intensely aware of what you are sensing and feeling in the moment without any kind of interpretation or judgment. Then we did a lot of work on enhancing the emotional intelligence, because you must have observed that people who are very intelligent, they at times commit suicide. So it seems that somewhere they are lagging behind, and somewhere their emotional intelligence doesn't match with their performance intelligence. During the pandemic, the suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput created a lot of roars over the news, and a person who has everything, in spite of that, he committed suicide. So it shows that how important is emotional intelligence is. So the EQ is the capability of understanding your own emotions, your own thought process, and your own feelings. So it is actually the understanding of your own abilities, so that you can, unless and until you understand yourself, you cannot understand others' emotions. So it is very important that you understand yourself and your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own beliefs, and subsequently you kind of understand others. Then there was another thing which we did is maintaining the positive jars. That means uh, during this pandemic, so for some of the patients, we asked that please accumulate little things which makes you happy. Maybe a very small thing which was kept somewhere. So put it in a jar that gives you happiness, and you collect all. Maybe a good quote, maybe a small thing, maybe something which you used during your school times. We keep certain things with us forever. So keeping those things is very important in a positive jar, which gives us a lot of good memories, happiness in our life. Then family time is very, very important. To be with the family, to be with the, to understand family in a more critical manner, in a more, uh, in a different manner, because this was the time when we really, really came to know that how we live with each other, what are the adjustment, or what are the expectations, or what are the feelings we have for each other. And taking one positive step each day is very, very important. Whatever you do, one positive, because there was so much of negativism present during this state, that it was very difficult for us to think about anything which is positive. Food and sleep again is very, very important. And in case of any adversity, physician consultation is very, very important. Uh, it is not the fever or the cough and cold. It is our mental health, which is so important in everybody's life. So the only difference we can see between a good day and a bad day is our attitude. So we need to develop our attitude in such a manner that the COVID situations, we have really we have coped up with our COVID situation, and we are now back to our work. Not the way we were, but still we are back to our work. And I think all of our attitudes have changed. All of us have learned something from this pandemic, and we have seen that the mostly the women have taken a lead role, to come up with the come up with their own situations, with their own problems, and they have consulted the counselors and the psychologists for their help, be it for their husband or for their child, but women have taken the lead. And to conclude, I would say that, you know, keeping something within yourself is not the solution. You have to come up with your problem for any situation and whatever problem you have. It's not that it is hiding will help, or escaping from the problem will help. It's not that. It is always better that you need to face the problem and you need to handle the problem. So to conclude, you can win if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We are enlightened and also motivated by your valuable and delightful speech. Thanks again, ma'am. Now it's time for question answer session. Over
Yes.
to Sreyoshi. Sorry, over to Nandita.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Now this is time for two questions for Dr. Chatterjee.
Yes.
We have we had a very enriching time with you, with your speech, and with the cases that you actually shared with us. Now, the first question for you, Dr. Chatterjee, is how important is the psychosocial education of parents and caregivers to help support children and build their resilience?
It is very important because, psychosocial is the biggest paraphernalia of an individual's life. So it is very important that the parent should be empowered, and even required, children should be enriched with their difficulties. A lot of time we have seen that parents, they don't support with the ideas the children have. Now we have to realize that the scenario has changed. Children are more exposed to the world, and they know, sometimes they know more than us. So it is always better that they should take a proper step to exchange the views and to give judgment on child's part. Always what we do is we take judgment or we take decision on child's part. It may not help sometimes. So it should be a mutual respect between the parent and the child to take and educate them accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. One more question for you. Social isolation is a very burning issue nowadays.
Yes.
Now, how does social isolation impact children who are differently abled?
See, as I mean, all these days there were a lot of ban on different things. For example, a special need children requires a lot of therapies. So therapies were stopped because their parents were scared to come up to the hospital or to the clinics because of the COVID situation. So therapies are actually the maintenance for these special need children. So it was stopped. Now it is very important that they should come back and they should take little precautions like, social distancing, putting masks, but they should start socializing, going to somebody's place or taking the child to some therapy center, or in sometimes to a shopping mall, because lot of isolation is very, very bad, not only for special needs children, for any human being, because as I said that we have a gregarious instinct. So socialization is very, very important, and these therapies should be restarted for helping these children.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Another question.
Yes.
Suppose a person is going through some psychological problem and
Yes.
is under some counseling session.
Yes.
So, if the problems wave more owing to the lockdown, do the counseling strategies for the person needs some modification?
See, all these days we have done a lot of virtual sessions with the patients, but sometimes, what happens, that these patients, they might need medications and face-to-face counseling, because when you are doing virtually things, you cannot connect the way you connect when the person is in person present in front of you. You understand what I mean?
Yes, yes.
So you can see the body language of the person, you can see what is going on in the which is not very prominent in virtual counseling. So it is better if situation is improved, they can come to the session in person. It is always better. For me, I'm not very comfortable with virtual session, although I did it, but
Okay.
I feel that coming in person is much more easier to assess a person, to give the therapy.
Okay, okay. Yes, as it is psychology, so it is very important to meet the person face to face to actually
Yes.
analyze his or her problem, or
Yes.
her or the actual crisis, what is going on within that person.
Because it is always reciprocation, it's not that
Yes, yes,
I will just speak and the other person will just cheer. It's not that.
yes,
It
yes,
is
yes,
both ways.
yes. It is the interaction that will actually help the more,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay, okay, okay. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Um, too many problems are there in our society, and as we are going through the postmodern era, so we are facing lots and lots of psychological problems, and
Yes.
you are like next to God for
No, no.
the human race. Okay, you people, the psychologists, they are actually next to God for the human race, because we
Yeah.
cannot connect with God directly, but we can talk to you people, and you work as a savior for us. So thank you, thanks a lot.
I just share one thing. Just before this session, I was seeing a patient, because right now I'm in hospital only.
Yes, yes.
I was seeing a patient, a 22-year-old girl who came to me. She has a lot of suicidal ideation, because,
Yes.
and she was going she was going through session virtually, but somehow she came to know about me through some of her friends, and she was going through session virtually, but somehow she came to know about me through some of her friends.
Hello.
So it is how important counseling, in hospital setup. So virtual counseling not always is very helpful. This, for everything there's merits and demerits. So I just wanted to share this. Anyway,
Okay,
thank you
okay.
so much.
Yes, yes. Thank you, man. Now, I would like to hand the session over to Dr. Sresh Chatterjee. Uh, Hello, Dr. Sresh Chatterjee.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you
yes.
once again, Dr. Ananita Chatterjee, for this invaluable session. Thank you, ma'am. And
Thank you, sir.
I'll have a word with you after the webinar is over. It is really enriching for us, and you truly are a support service that we all as individuals need at this special time when we're going through so much of anxiety and so much of stress. So thank you
Yes.
once again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank
thanks to the college as well. And
Thank you.
ICSSR. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our second session, and we'll be starting with our third session. But what have we picked up from the last session? The COVID-19 pandemic has isolated survivors and cut them off from their safety nets. It has also led to the emergence of new forms of violence. Perpetrators are using COVID-19 restrictions and threat of COVID-19 infection to restrict survivors' movements and to coerce survivors to stay with them under the same roof. Monitoring of internet use, removal of mobile phones, and using hidden downloadable phone apps to monitor movements are just some of the new methods of coercive control in what we call this new normal. The previous session provided a platform to discuss the various adaptations of social support services to fight against newer forms of violence by restarting safe channels of communication or discreetly establishing new forms of safe communication. As we know that social isolation has always been recognized as a very coercive form of control, which is used by perpetrators. And these measures for home isolation, which are undoubtedly a need from a public health perspective, only isolates survivors, and they get isolated from their significant support networks. And what these coercive measures during social isolation does is that it makes these survivors invisible to the outer world. uh, which also definitely, brings me to talk about this wonderful concept that Dr. Anindita Chatterjee spoke to us about, these positive jars. I think all of us need that in our lives, where we can take a small container and put all our happy thoughts in it. J.K. Rowling did that when she wrote Harry Potter, and Harry could choose the happy memories whenever he wanted. And it is the need of the hour for us right now, um, because this world is something that we are not used to. This world is something that we are not acclimatized with yet. And therefore, support services are more than ever necessary now. Uh, we have come to the very last and third and final session of our webinar, and this we've titled Sharing of Innovative Strategies and Best Practices. Now, this will provide a platform for our presenters to discuss service innovations and share their best practices. Now, there are, of course, challenges of providing such innovative support mechanisms, especially during the COVID-19 limitations. Like, there is difficulty in making and maintaining contact with survivors. There is a decline in follow-up. Whenever you're visiting a counselor, there is no way for the counselor to conduct a follow-up, because very often we've just heard that the vulnerable genders are denied access of phones and even internet connections. There is often difficulty in assessing risk and determining any kind of protective measures remotely. Now, how do the innovative strategies respond to such challenges? And we have to, and in our first session itself, we saw that when we talk about the vulnerable genders, we have to be inclusive. We have to talk about the diversity that is out there. So to deliberate more on this, I would like to now invite Mr. Debaduti Kormukar to welcome and introduce our first presenters. Our second presenters of this session will be welcomed and introduced by Dr. Navanita Basu. Now I would like to hand it over to Mr. Kormukar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. It's my privilege to introduce the speakers for the first presentation of session 3, that is sharing of innovative strategies and best practices. The resource persons for this presentation is Ms. Shreyashi Sharma and Ms. Neil Sengupta, Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality, Ashoka University, Haryana. The Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality was established at Ashoka University in 2015 and is one of the centers of excellence at the university. It is the first center of its kind in India to study the broader spectrum of questions relating to both gender and sexuality. This spectrum includes issues of inequality, fantasy, pleasure, identity, and politics that are key realities of our everyday lives. Set in the interdisciplinary liberal arts context of Ashoka University, the center is committed to studying the many intersections at which we encounter these questions in India and around the world and address them through scholarship and activism. The center regularly offers summer internships to students and organizes several events on the Ashoka University campus, as well as in Delhi NCR, such as a speaker series, student seminars, workshops, performances, and film screenings. Now I would like to invite the resource persons for first presentation, that is sharing of innovative strategies and best practices, Ms. Shreyashi Sharma and Ms. Neil Sengupta, to deliver their presentation. Over to you, Ms. Sharma and Ms. Sengupta.
Thank you, Mr. Kamarkar, for inviting us. It's truly an honor to be amongst such brilliant people. We'll just like to share our screen with you before we begin. Just give me a moment. Basically what we're going to talk about is how the center views the shadow pandemic and what contribution and role does the center play in understanding the shadow pandemic. As Mr. Kamarkar has already introduced the center, before we tell you what exactly the center does, I would just like to give you a brief context on how we function. We understand that center is located in an academic space, and academic spaces in general are not the immediate go-to place for any distressing situation. We do not have any action-based approach that can swiftly respond to a distressing situation. So what we would like to focus in this presentation is on the center's long-term, slower work of building, archiving, and sort of developing the discourse of gender and sexuality. And while we do say that it is long-term and slower, we in no way want to intend that it is not urgent or it is not need of the hour. In fact, we would like to suggest that it is constantly a need of the hour, with or without the pandemic, the work that we do. We try and even though we are located in an academic space, our work constantly tries to bridge the gap between theory and practice through our various events that we will be talking about. We constantly involve students, academicians, peers, grassroots organizations, activists, and all people involved in the social advocacy to sort of discuss and find out ways on how to deal with the notion of gender and sexuality, how to deal with the different components of gender and sexuality, be it ideas of pleasure, identity, be it different forms of violence that exist across all marginalized genders, be it the idea of inclusivity and exclusivity and how that plays a role. So through our work, this is what we try to build. We try to create that archive. We try to find the linkages between our contemporary world and how different forms of violence play in our contemporary world, but also how they are not necessarily disjointed from our past histories and from the past historical facets that are very interwoven into our community. So this is what we basically do. We'll be talking a little bit about the sort of activities that we do. I'd like Neil to start this forward and just explain to us what exactly the center does. Neil, over to you. I think there's an issue with Neil's audio. No, we cannot hear you, Neil. We can't. You'll have to switch on the mic. Um, by the time Neil sorts of joins us and explains to us what exactly what are the various activities that the center does, I'd like to talk to you about firstly just basic the different areas that the center is involved in. A very important component of the center that the center does are the workshops, amongst other events and amongst other research areas that we build into. But workshops are particularly very important because workshops are particularly very important because they sort of help us extend the physical boundaries of an academic space to areas beyond just the university space of Ashoka or Delhi NCR. And thankfully, we've continued these workshops even during the lockdown. And they don't really just act as a sort of a gender sensitization program or just disseminating information on the discourse of gender and sexuality, but we make them as conversational as possible. And we try and incorporate people from different areas of life. We have done workshops in schools, we've done workshops in colleges, we've done workshops with corporates, and we continue doing it. And something that the virtual medium has really helped us is that we've been able to spread it across to different parts of the country. There are 4 key takeaways that we usually expect that the people who attend our workshop and are a part of it get out of our workshops. First is just understanding how effective communication is very important for consent. And I think just a basic nuanced understanding of the ideas of consent, of the ideas of power, of the ideas of accountability are very, very important, because even though we have a lot of avenues, legal avenues that help provide us justice in case of gender or sexual violence, we have very few and very scattered avenues to sort of prevent these. And these workshops act as a preventive technique when they clear the understanding of the participants on how these notions work. Another key takeaway is how power in our daily life intersects in our daily interactions, and also how agency, how desire, how discomforts occur within ourselves, around us, and how we can better articulate all these notions. And also just how greater sensitivity is required within our lived experiences, in our immediate surroundings, to sort of understand how violence takes place, how we can prevent such violence, how we can navigate our worldview in a society which is highly patriarchal and which is highly violent for a lot of genders. So this is something that our workshops help navigate. 4 modules that we have in the workshop. Our first module is framing gender, where we explain to people how gender roles are formed. You know, our stereotypical notions, ghar ki Lakshmi, mard ko dard hota hai. You know, a man, man ko dard nahi hota. I mean, a man can never feel pain, or a woman is the goddess Lakshmi. Things like these, they're so stereotypical and ingrained in our domestic spaces that our workshop on framing gender helps unpack them, helps understand how our own gender identity, our own expression of gender is shaped because of these stereotypes. We also do a workshop on exploring sexuality, where we explain to people how sexuality is not just limited to a singular sexual orientation, but it's quite complex. It changes with our circumstances. It's very multiple and it's very fluid. So we sort of try and have that conversation. And a lot of this is just shaped from the experiences of people who are present in those workshops. We also do a workshop on understanding the law, where we explain to people how sexual harassment systemically takes place, be it in our domestic spaces or be it in workplaces, and just a basic working knowledge of the POSH Act, an understanding of how these grievances should be handled, how gender sensitivity is important to handle cases of sexual harassment, and just creating a more conducive environment for both the parties that are involved in a sexual harassment case. We also do a workshop on expanding diversity, which includes just expanding our notions of violence to not just one particular gender, but all different types of gender, seeing how gender intersects with caste, religion, with our identities, with our political leanings. So we sort of explain this to people. Before we move on to what else we do, I think Neil has joined us, so she can explain to us what are the other events and what exactly the center is.
I'm sorry, can you hear me though?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, thank God, sorry. I'm very sorry about the technical lag. I'm not sure what happened with my device. Thank you, Shreyashi, for continuing on my behalf there. So just to give a bit of context, the shadow pandemic, as we're witnessing, expands the UN coin definition, right, and affects not just cisgendered women, but queer, trans, and intersex persons, but also people from socioeconomic communities, from marginalized socioeconomic communities in ways more than one. As our primary point of contact are students in Ashoka and peers across campuses and advocacy spaces, we are trying to further build and sustain these conversations through our events, dialogue-based initiatives, and what Shesh was talking about in the workshops. So in our events, mostly through our speaker series, for example, in Theory and Practice, which we host with, again, Center for Studies, Gender and Sexuality at New York University. And there was this event particularly poignant to our current context. It was on colonialism, sex, and disease with Sadia Abbas, Nayan Shah, and Chara Gupta. Moderated by Martin Menon, where we brought together conversations and to really explore a larger historical arc through which to view the current COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, in another installment, which is Ishq, Issues in Society, History and Queerness, we had a conversation with activist and writer Shubha, who spoke on the politics of obscenity, sexuality in the digital age. Some of these very poignant concerns, particularly for queer individuals, right? I mean, we're talking about domestic space, shrinking of privacy, shrinking of mobility when we're confined in our domestic spaces. So really understanding the role of the center in an academic perspective would be to grapple with the issues, with their nuances, but most importantly, their histories, right? And to stress on the role of dialogue in both understanding and critiquing the discourse on gender and sexuality, precisely at a time like this with its own complexities, in bringing more awareness and building more solidarities. In terms of what we do as a direct point of contact with students, we run drop-in hours for anyone, really staff or student, to air concerns, share experiences, and seek support. We have been thankfully able to keep it afloat through online platforms owing to the pandemic. So what you see is these drop-in hours is the kind of support that is available to them when you are when the pandemic was not happening, when in our classrooms, when we talk with the professors, the kind of friends we go to, our peer circles, when that space is missing, that becomes these drop-in circles become a crucial resource point to find a common support system, right? A confidential and non-judgmental space. So these are primarily the more dialogue-based work we do. Shreya, why don't you go ahead and talk about the practice you already did, right, about the workshops?
Yeah, so like I said about the workshop, that we will also expand a little on how we sort of build this network of the workshops through our training of trainers. So, Neil.
Okay, you're done. Okay, I'll begin. Sorry, because of technical lag, I'm a bit confused there. With the training of trainers, can you go to that slide, please?
Yeah.
Okay, I can't see it here, but that's all right. So in the Trainers of Trainer program, as you see, we did it last year, right, Sheshi? And our previous program materialized into a cohort of 12, all set to take workshops, set to take these CSGS workshops in their varied and wide regions and professional fields. And this training is nothing but to impart a practical in-depth use of the CSGS modules, the workshop modules, but also in some sense to further liaison with practitioners, activists, educators, teachers, and really learn from each other's best practices. I think doing this in an online medium really expanded our reach and helped connect people from across borders as well. And some of these people were, professionals already in their field, in the field of gender and sexuality. And during the pandemic, they had to face a lot of challenges. So what the Trainers of Trainers program was, in some sense, a community space where all of us can, exchange field notes on how we can better equip how we can better equip to deal with the crises. And to exchange notes on best practices we can do during the pandemic, pedagogic reflection, so on and so forth. some common questions that I think all of us in some point of time have encountered is how we cope up with sticky situations, how we can think together. So this program in some sense was a kind of building networks, was a kind of way to nurture a community in some sense. Shreyashi, why don't you continue on the professionals part?
Yeah, so something that, as a center, we constantly strive for is how to consistently sustain the conversation on gender and sexuality, as well as keep building it, because with our changing circumstances, violence plays out in very different ways, and the notions of gender and sexuality become even more complex with the changing times. So something that that the training of trainers sort of also helped us realize is that we received a lot of applications from professionals, like lawyers, like academicians in humanities colleges, and while they didn't directly deal with gender and sexuality, a lot of them were always stuck in how to handle such situations. So while lawyers had cases on gender violence and had cases on sexual violence, they were always in a fix on how to really deal with these matters sensitively, how to understand this. So, and similarly with college professionals, with academicians, while they don't directly deal with this, they do have students from diverse backgrounds, from diverse genders, and it's always difficult to sort of understand how to deal with situations like these. So something that we plan to do also is to extend these to a training of professionals, so that this gender sensitivity is carried forward to the systemic places where violence actively tries to hinder and actively tries to meddle with our daily lives. And we also plan to extend, like in our research as well, which Neil will explain to you, the kind of projects that we plan to do to sort of fight gender-based violence.
So from time to time, we liaison in projects that syncs with the center's objective and goals. For example, we are currently working on a project that studies the efficacy, the effectiveness, sorry, of Mahila Thanas under the ambit of state government, various state governments. And through this work, we hope to identify the shortcomings in effectively handling violence based on gender and sexuality. But in the future, we also hope to do gender sensitization workshops with police personnel, and within the communities. Shreyashi, why don't you give a bit of context on that workshop?
It's important, I think, because we for legal recourses for gender-based violence and sexual violence. But do we understand that, the police personnel there have the basic understanding of how to deal with these issues, how to be sensitized to these matters? And a lot of times, in fact, their approach is such that the community that is involved in this sort of violence is itself alienated from the police personnel. So what we plan to do is sort of conduct gender sensitization workshops for these police personnel, so that they build a stronger community bond, something that they have to do on a daily basis. And also within the, I think, police personnel also, we see a stark difference in how female police officers have their lives much more tough than their male counterparts, when their domestic spaces are not safe, their domestic pressure is so much. So we also plan to do activities within the organization, within different state police departments as well, to sort of bring that sensitivity in their departments, to sort of make them understand how power plays beyond their organization, but also within the domestic spaces, and how there is a hierarchy and a patriarchal order present. So something that we do plan to extend on. Moving on to, just before we end it all, just a couple of reflections that we would like to leave for everybody here is that we understand violence on a lot of existing legal and sociological aspects, but it's also important to continuously revise our understanding of violence, to expand it on different grounds of gender, sex, and sexuality, to take into account the different genders and how it affects them in a myriad of ways, and to also provide these spaces for reflections, which our center constantly tries to do. Something that can be as simple as, we always look at violence as a direct impact on someone's physical health, or mental health, and that is how even the law treats it as. But we don't look into the fact that how violence creeps into our daily lives, how for some genders the pandemic has brought in increased surveillance, how constantly just stepping out of the house has become difficult because of the patriarchal structure within our families or in our neighborhood or in our immediate community. So I think something that we all need to think of is how it's important to expand our understanding of violence constantly vis-a-vis all these notions of gender and sex. And also just community spaces in general, which Neil will talk about why they are important and how the pandemic has affected them.
So as we were talking about, and I think this part has been stressed a lot in our presentation, is the need to have a community space. And as you know, as we try to reorient our work in the digital age at the center, we also, I think, a large part of our consideration is, is to be invested in building this community space and to keep getting and keep running it, even in in online spaces in the limited capacity we can. Um, so in that regard, we have two new events, two new initiatives coming up. One is a Baitak style series that hopes to begin informal conversations on gender and sexuality as we view it in our everyday, as how we foreground it on the everyday. Um, and this kind of format is a participation based format, unlike what you see in panel discussions. And we call it candid. We call it candid, a queer feminist Baitak. But again, we're not able to share much on it, but hope it works out good, and we'll be able to invite people from all walks of life to have an informal conversation over chai and samosa, even though if it's online. Meanwhile, we also have another project on the lines of an infoline, which is a student-run project. What the infoline is, that it can be a one-stop point to find information on gender and sexuality, but to also direct people to resources such as queer-friendly legal aid, shelter, mental health professionals, and so on. So obviously, we're looking at using diverse languages for the purposes of accessibility, um, particularly when we want to expand it not just in Ashoka but to Delhi and Haryana eventually. But then again, this is also in early stages of development. Just to conclude, we would like to emphasize once more on the role of academic institutions, especially in bridging the theory-practice gap, and inviting diverse perspectives in understanding the shadow pandemic, right? And not just understanding it from the archive, but also the material work in the field that grassroots organizations have been doing. And for just on a partner, all of us have been working in the field. Just to say that despite and because of these odds, we have prevailed and transformed in our strength. In our communities, we have found refuge and resilience. And bidding adieu to a tumultuous year, we have carried with us hope for a reimagined future, and greater possibilities for community building despite the discouraging circumstance. And the center hopes to take this mandate forward in the new year. And with that, we end, but we also open it up for conversations. And thank you once again, Dr. Chatterjee, for inviting the center here. And yeah, please.
Thank you to the presenters for for enlightening us with your activism and the work you do with regards to the inequality, pleasure, identity. And it has so contemporary relevance with respect to gender and sexuality, or more so with regards to the gender and sexual violence in contemporary scenario. And also I would like to add with your presentation is the fact that at a time when the social health in general in the pandemic context has been deteriorating in as a whole. So I suppose that the things which you have put up to and the efforts which you are into, that will definitely help us in bettering our social health amongst us. With saying this, I would like to pose a few questions that has come up with regards to your presentation. The first question is with regard that how important are these community spaces for students?
I think they're extremely important. I think the one biggest reason why the center, while before the pandemic had been doing drop-in hours, it decided to continue this because I think for students also we're made to believe that home is a safe space, but that's not true for all students. And a lot of times home can be sort of like the space that curtails your voice, or sort of a very violent space as well in extreme cases. So I think one thing that the center really realized was that students in the university, a lot of students felt a lot more safer. There are a lot of more avenues that Ashoka provides to sort of for students to interact. So which is why we continue drop-in hours where we have these informal conversations. They're completely confidential with the student. And though we do have a dedicated center, the Center for Mental Health that we have a Center for Well-being in Ashoka that has mental health professionals. So that is something that we do have a space for, but we also wanted to provide a space where students can just come and ask questions. Students struggle with their identities. They struggle with the notion of their own sexuality, their own gender roles. So I think it's very important, and this is something that we've continued through the last semester, and we plan to continue in the virtual through our virtual medium as well, because students really need that space, that safe space to sort of come and confide with us, to sort of share their confusions and also seek resources from us. So we constantly keep providing them information. If they're interested in reading something academically, if they're interested in understanding a particular notion of gender or sexuality, we constantly help them develop. So I think, yeah, they're extremely important, and I think universities should find ways to sort of extend this to their virtual mediums, definitely.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, have you encountered any real life issues where you as a center had to combat the shadow pandemic? If yes, what did you do as a center?
So like I said, we do not, obviously, an academic space is not the space where immediately someone would approach in case of a distressing situation. So it's not something, because they do not expect an action-based approach from a university space. We do more of the long-term slower work. But within the Ashoka campus itself, I think we do have, every time there is a notion, or if there is some violence that occurs, and of course it's a large community, there are a lot of students, so beyond Ashoka also these conversations really do become a central part of the center. And while we do have a dedicated sexual harassment internal complaint committee that handles these issues very that's actually gender neutral and handles these in a very, very manner. They do go through trainings, through workshops, but individually also a lot of students, sometimes it might not necessarily be in the realm of direct violence or in the realm of direct harassment, but students themselves in their daily lives a lot of times face situations where they're just confused about the notions of consent. There are situations where they don't understand, there is peer pressure involved. So I think in that sense our center has directly always talked to the students. It's always been in conversations with students. We also have dedicated Ashoka Queer Collective and a feminist collective that the Center for Gender and Sexuality is constantly in touch with, because those are student-driven initiatives, and that sort of helps students as well. So everything that happens within the campus or beyond it, or that involves Ashoka members as such, I think the center is constantly involved in that conversation. We encourage all sorts of safe space within the campus physically as well. We have avenues. We've specially provided for gender neutral bathrooms. We've provided for safe spaces within the campus. So I think we constantly try and build that in the campus. And I mean, we continue doing this on the virtual medium as well. Neil, if you want to add something.
No, I think you have said it well. I think the more what we do primarily would be more of the conversation dialogue-based work, but we also liaison with intervention-based centers and initiatives in the capacity that we can, contribute either through sharing of intellectual resources, workshop resources, um, or using the center as a resource point, using the library or something like that. So these are the ways we primarily are able to work, in our university structure in some sense.
And eventually, like we said, we have the info line project, the student-driven project, so that eventually we plan to extend this to a lot of the northern belt, to sort of make this one-stop avenue for people to make calls and to liaison with mental health professionals, legal aid experts, as well as all the different helplines that are already available. We have the suicide helpline available in our country. Different organizations have initiated this. We have the mental health helpline. So we plan to liaison with all these different avenues to sort of also provide that one-stop connection with people around us. So yeah, it's different ways that we plan to sort of tackle this in a university context.
Okay, thank you. I have another question that you have spoken about the gender and sexual violence and your efforts to cater to gender and sexual based violence. Have you planned for, or rather, have you any thoughts for the future with regards to any male related violence that more often we do not see in front, but cases may be found in the domestic sphere or outside the domestic sphere? Have you got any plans with regards to the male-based violence that occurs with male?
So this is something that I think we already do, something that our workshops constantly stress upon when we discuss notions of gender and sexuality. We discuss toxic masculinity as well in our workshops, and the experiences of the participants have been such that we learn from these experiences as well. So we do tell people how the society imposes these certain gender roles on both male and female, as well as all the other genders as well. This heteronormative genders are imposed on us. So I think this is something that the center has constantly done. Our series this time, the theory and practice series, that it discusses not just a particular gender, but we extend to all different. We extend to the trans umbrella as well. So I think the center has never been actually focused on the fixed heterosexual role of a male and a female. In fact, I think we've constantly stressed upon the need to accept the diversity of genders around us and to sort of also come up with practices that are inclusive of all genders. So I don't think violence necessarily works in one particular way. Of course, there are genders, marginalized genders, that are more affected by some sort of violence than the other. But I think the center already continues to do this, and that is our approach to all the different works that we do. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Shreyashi Sharma and Ms. Neil Sengupta, for your wonderful presentation. I hope the participants will be highly enlightened by your lecture and by your presentation. Now I would like to call Ms. Dr. Navanita Basu to introduce the speakers for the second session. Over to you, Dr. Navanita Basu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Navanita Basu. Thank you very much, Dr. Kormokar. Now we will move on to our next presentation. This presentation is by Nazaria, a queer feminist research group. Nazaria was formed in October 2014 by a group of Delhi-based queer feminist activities. It was started to sensitize the work and culture of groups and individuals working on issues of gender-based violence, livelihoods, education, and health from a queer perspective through research and evaluations, capacity building, and advocacy. Nazaria uses the word queer for people who have diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. A queer perspective helps to build links between issues of people marginalized on the basis of gender and sexuality and the existing work on violence, livelihoods, education, and health in order to impact the discourse on pleasure, desire, rights, and entitlements. Now I would like to call upon the presenters of Nazaria. Over to you, Nazaria. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Navanita. I am Rituparna. Rituparna Bora, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am the co-founder and co-director of Nazaria. And Navonita has told about Nazaria, and this is about the organization, and this is about COVID times. So I have a small presentation on what we did. Just 1 minute. Huh? Yeah. Can you see? Can everyone see it?
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, so I'll give you the context of this poster. But as you have clearly told about that, we work on issues of gender and sexuality. And one of the things that Nazaria has been doing is conducting workshops in various schools, colleges, and different organizations. We also do, and I heard you asking Neil and Shiroshi from Ashoka about crisis intervention work. And as a resource group, we also do crisis intervention work, which involves legalities, which involves the court. We have a helpline where we get a lot of calls. We run a helpline. We also provide free mental health care to LGBTQI people, and we have 3 counselors for that. So people, students, mostly students who cannot afford this expensive mental health care bill, they can come and they can access these services from us. Yes to research and all. And so what happened was that all of you know that during March 2020, there was this call to lockdown, and the immediate challenges to the LGBTQI community were mostly witnessed in terms of income generation, like people who were doing regular everyday income. Those income generation modes were stalled. Domestic violence at home rose to an all-time high. It was very, very high. The lockdown posed a threat to accessing safe spaces, thereby causing mental trauma and stress. And we'll talk about all these things. So what we did is that our helpline mostly runs from Monday to Friday, 10 to 6, but we extended the helpline to Saturday also. So we included counseling services. We also did so our office is also a drop-in center for LGBTQI people. So people can drop in, can come, can rest, can sleep, can watch movies, and we actually, when I'm saying can sleep, can actually sleep in our office. Because of the kind of violence that queer and trans people face in the at homes, and Shiroshi has talked about the kind of violence that queer and trans people face in the home. They can come and sleep. They can talk to one of us. So it's a drop-in center. So because of the lockdown, the drop-in center had to be closed, and we used to have monthly meetings. So the monthly meetings also now had to be stopped. So we actually had shifted to Zoom online meetings. Now we understand that Zoom online meetings not everyone can access. It is a class issue also. The kind of discussions we have, the kind of technology it's required, it is definitely a class issue. So we recognizing that it is a class issue, but still we organized Zoom meetings during the pandemic. We also collected money and we distributed rations. We sent money to people, almost 76, 77 trans people, mostly transgender men. We did webinar series. So that's what we did. Now, the kind of calls that were coming to us, mostly Suicidal calls were coming to us mostly weekly, on a weekly basis. So I should also tell you here about the number of calls. The number of calls increased, doubled during the during the lockdown and during the pandemic. Earlier, we used to get like one call in a week. During the pandemic, and still now, we get around 7 calls a week. That's an average. At one point of time, we actually handles 18 calls in a week. So our people who were handling the helpline were trained peer counselors. So parents were passing homophobic and transphobic comments. There was surveillance in terms of what they can wear, what clothes they should be assigned to, what TV shows they can watch. And this is an important element too. Some were being forced to undergo conversion therapy. There was a lack of privacy at home, and what happened is that many trans people who were undergoing gender affirmative surgeries, they had to be stalled because these medicines, these hormones that had come during the lockdown were not regarded as essential medicines. There was physical and mental violence by husband against queer women who were married. Queer women spoke about, online meetings with where parents forced them to have online meetings with prospective grooms. So these were some of the things that people spoke about. So what we did also is to, and actually you can take a look at this guide. We, along with 5 other queer and trans activists, we wrote a guide on how to deal with the crisis, and if crisis happens, how to deal with it. And you can find this note in this gorinam.net, where you can find. This is a poster which was shared on our Instagram page about the problems, the risk of high risk of people who binds chest during coronavirus. So this was done by one of our trans colleague. These are some of the events that we organized. So our online events were about queerness and art. There was about lesbian visibility. And on one occasion, we actually called a parent of a queer person, and she had a discussion with other LGBTQI people about how she started accepting her child, her daughter as a queer person. And this was done because at that time we heard in the news about the death of Anjana Harish, who was forced to die by suicide because of her parents' parental violence. So we organized also some events called Our Lives, Our Tales. So Nazaria has been organizing these events called Our Lives, Our Tales, where we talk about LGBTQI history. So this is a oral history project that we have been doing since 2015. So this time we did it in an online format, and we called the LGBTQ collectives from all over the country to come and speak about their history. So between May 17 and 31st, a social media campaign called Compassionately Yours was launched, because we heard about a lot of violence that was coming within homes and families of our LGBTQI clients. So people, so we have an LGBTQ group, WhatsApp group, and people were sharing left, right, and center about the kind of violence that they have been facing at homes. So this campaign was basically meant to, so we reached out to relatives, we reached out to, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. We can.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So we reached out to relatives, we reached out to many friends, families, and we wanted them to share about why do they support their LGBTQI kin, the relative that they have. And I'm going to show you a very short video of how this campaign was designed, and this is someone who shared about their friend. Yes. So, yeah, so what we did was that the kind of relief work that we're doing was very difficult because during the lockdown, thankfully the people who donated us money were not very strict about giving rations or only doing things, because we reached out to people even in people from Calcutta reached out to us for money. And many a times people do not transfer money, but as a queer feminist organization, we were very sure and we believed firmly that queer and trans people have the right to decide what they want to buy, how they want to buy, and with the kind of money that we're providing, we're not providing them a lot of money, we're providing them like 3,000 rupees, but we didn't want them to just give ration because we thought ration was important for them. For they might need some money for phone recharge, they might need some money for some other purposes, but we don't know. So it was important for us to also transfer money and not just give ration. So that took us a lot of time to actually collect 50 trans men's data from all over North India and transfer money in their bank account, running from bank to bank and giving checks, and for 3 months we supported them. We also gave ration to many trans women and trans people during the lockdown, and mostly we could reach out to trans people. We could only reach out to a very one couple who identify themselves as a lesbian couple in terms of providing relief. One of the things that happened was that there was this organization called Tonic Worldwide, and they wanted to do a campaign. This is a poster that they made, and I'm against homophobia, transphobia, or this let me get one things straight, I'm not. And they made like 5-6 posters, and these are the covers for Zoom background, and they wanted to collaborate with us. So we collaborated with them, and this is the picture of Fair D'Souza sharing one of the Zoom background. What happened also, side by side, we were doing a lot of casework. And so the courts were doing the cases online, and most of the cases were done through video conferencing. And there was this judgment given by Uttarakhand High Court, which said, and we were helping the queer woman file a habeas corpus. And the Uttarakhand court judgment said that of course queer people can't marry, but same-sex couples have the right to live together. And it was a very important judgment. And similarly, several other judgments were passed in Delhi and in other states. And Nazaria was part of all this crisis intervention work. Now, coming to challenges, I think one thing that we need to understand that gender-based violence have risen sharply during the pandemic, and whenever legal intervention is required, Nazaria relies a lot on the LGBTQI community, because the government bodies or the charitable organizations or even the feminist organizations, many feminist organizations, are very heteronormative in their language or in the structures. So we were relying a lot on the LGBTQI community, and it was also, and we need to understand that people we are relying on are themselves marginalized to a large extent. The government support for trans community during the pandemic has been extended to only 1% of the total number of trans people counted in 2011 census. Fundraising in the pandemic has been very tough. While we recognize that, like on an urgent basis, our well-wishers will definitely give us fund, but we need to think of a sustainable model to go forward. We have been able to do a lot of online and offline, online work through our Instagram, through our Facebook, through Zoom meetings. But how do we reach out to non-metro cities? How do we reach out to other parts of the country where internet connectivity might be a big issue? And also what was important was that the overall health and well-being of the entire Nazaria staff was also a point of concern during the pandemic, because the organization is a queer feminist organization. All of us in the organization identify ourselves as queer or trans. So we also have issues. So our issues and then the community issues, and it was very difficult to actually look after our well-being. And for that, we actually hired someone to do some well-being classes for the entire team. Now, going forward, how to work our ways around a new normal is the main question. Like, for instance, on 31st of January, Nazaria organized a LGBTQ picnic in a park, and people just came, and it felt like old days. People came just seeing a poster on Instagram, and I was sitting there wearing a yellow sweater, and I'm like, you can just see, and people called on the helpline, and I'm like, yeah, you can see me. I'm wearing a yellow sweater and I have curly hair. And it seemed like old days. It seemed like old days when we did not have a mobile phone, but we still managed to meet people. And it reminded me of the Red Rose Club. It reminded me of so many things that we did during that time. And people just came and said that we were really alone during the pandemic, and thank God that there was this offline event. So how much do we rely on online is the question. Secondly, how do we see class in the new normal? Like, we have the privilege of sitting in a room and doing Zoom call or talking over Zoom. But for many people, everyday earning is very important. Like, they have to open their shops, and including and this is in the realm of gender and sexuality, not in other realms. I'm talking about people who are trans, who are from the working class, people who are queer, who are from the working class, are actually cannot care about the pandemic anymore. They have to go out. So Nazariya has started going out and conducting offline trainings as well. And so this is how we have to see class now. And this is going forward. So we'll have so many questions to think about. What strategies to take? What strategies are we learning? Mental health is a very important concern that we need to focus on in this pandemic. And if you don't focus on pandemic, we'll keep losing people. I want to stop here. And any questions?
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
Ma'am, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, ma'am. We have some questions. First question is that do you think a lack of understanding of queer and trans issues within the medical community impacted access to healthcare services for the LGBTQ1 community during the pandemic?
Absolutely. And to be honest, we also we have conducted workshops with the medical community here in Delhi, Safdarjung, and the kind of questions they had were amazing. Like, they were so sure that trans people would require a certificate from them to undergo surgery, because kya pata kya ho jayega. It's like, we don't know what will happen. What if they want to reverse? What if they want to? And then we had to say that it's their agency. That's how they want to live their life. They have to live their life. So the kind of knowledge that the medical community have is very little, and we need to focus a lot on working with the medical community. This is absolutely important.
Okay, ma'am, there is another question. A lot of online activities are happening, and even your organization is hosting a lot of online activities. But isn't the virtual space also an arena for online harassment? How do you handle that?
Yes, actually, it's a very important question. So recently, we were hosting we were facilitating a workshop for some other organization, and I don't know how did they started inviting people, because we are very clear about inviting people. We'll ask people's name, gender, where are they from, and other things. And this person, 2-3 people started showing their screen, and they started showing porn. Now, about porn, it's other thing. It's a different debate. But no, we didn't want to see porn at that time when we're talking about gender and sexuality and issues around gender and sexuality. And they actually clicked a photo of the organizer and they posted it on the sharing screen. And it was really, really scary, because for female assigned at birth people, for cis women, especially there were many cis women who were there who were very young, and they were very scared. And we had to take strict action. We had to just go off, and the organizers are now finding out. But this is what happens, and how do we tackle it is actually by having a waiting room option, by asking people name, pronouns. It's a huge responsibility on the organizers to make sure that whoever comes for the meeting should be aware of sexual harassment at workplace. Now this is done by ICSSR and by your college. So your POSH POSH guidelines will be functional here. So before starting any meeting, when you start your meeting, you should always announce that this meeting will be under POSH guidelines. So anyone seen harassing anyone will be sent to the IC. So these are some of the things that you need to take care of while you are doing online meetings.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basu. Could you just conclude the session then?
Thank you, Dr. Sreoshi Chatterjee. Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing such an informative and wonderful presentation with us, and most importantly, for sharing the work experiences with us. And I think the strategies and the practices which your organization is adopting, it will definitely have a very positive impact on the community. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And it has been an honor to have this session with all our esteemed presenters, because we got to hear about the real life issues that they have been dealing with. Before we move on to our final leg of our journey today, that is the valedictory session, I would just like to briefly sum up what this session was all about. So this last session looked at how the shadow pandemic not only affects cisgendered women, but also impacts the queer, trans, and intersex persons and people from various marginalized socioeconomic communities. And it impacts them in more ways than one. I had read somewhere when I was doing my research on Nazaria, who eventually joined us, and it's so important that they did. I had read somewhere that, you know, on the helplines that Rituparna was talking about, previously they had reported calls from the queer community to aid them in the transition process or to help them to come out to their families. But in this new norm of the new normal, these calls have been replaced by distress calls. And these distress calls majorly are to complain against domestic violence. So therefore, there is an urgent need. Even when Neil and Shreyoshi, they spoke about the need to develop a space. A space can be at two levels. So at one level, it has to be at the grassroots level, which can be a go-to site to address issues of gender violence. But equally important, and this is what we understood through Ashoka's presentation, that, you know, equally important are spaces which I would like to call advocacy spaces, which are created through workshops, events, and dialogue-based initiatives. These are required to start, build, and sustain conversations around the issue of gender-based violence. Having said that, I must point out that throughout the day, all our distinguished resource persons have given us immensely deep insights, and really has helped us to try and decode this concept of the shadow pandemic. Like Miss Mukherjee, who had come to our session previously, she said that we shouldn't call it the shadow pandemic. This is a pandemic also. Having said that, we have now come to the very last leg of our journey for today, and that is the valedictory session. So I take this opportunity to invite our internal quality assurance cell coordinator, Dr. Kamala Mitro, to welcome and introduce our very special guest for this valedictory session. Over to you, Dr. Mitro.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor and privilege for me to introduce our special guest in valedictory session, Dr. Nandita Banerjee Dhawan. Dr. Dhawan is an assistant professor and director of School of Women Studies, Jadavpur University. Prior to this, she was a research coordinator at the school and has worked on research projects on marriage, domestic violence, gender, and labor. Her research interests lie in the area of feminism, women, gender studies, gender and intersectionality, higher education, religion and politics, family marriage, and domestic violence. With this brief introduction, I would now request and welcome Dr. Dhawan to deliver her valedictory address. Over to you, madam.
Dr. Dhawan, your mic is muted, I think.
Am I audible now? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good afternoon to everybody. And I congratulate Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobis Mahavidyalaya for conducting this seminar on such an important topic. And I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present my views in the valedictory session. We've been passing through, I don't have a presentation, I'll just read through, and I hope that shouldn't be a problem. So we've been passing through trying times globally since the past 1 year due to the pandemic. As stringent measures such as stay-at-home orders were taken all over the world to contain the spread of the virus, the shadow pandemic of gender violence showed that COVID-19 is exposing, exploiting, and increasing gender inequalities. As was discussed today, gender violence is neither new nor unexpected. This lockdown has simply made it evident as to who are the major sufferers of gender violence. This includes, as Professor Chatterjee spoke, and she summarized the last session, this includes not only cisgendered women, but also queer, trans, intersex persons, along with those who are differently abled, migrant or homeless women, sex workers, and even people from marginalized socioeconomic communities. We've discussed how gender-based violence creates barriers to participation in economic, social, and political spheres, and how work from home creates more opportunities for abuse. There have been important pointers to how domestic violence affects performance in the workplace and how it has impacted productivity, attendance, and retention of workers. There is enough data to show how COVID-19 has isolated survivors and cut them off from their safety nets by restricting their mobility and social communication. They are being unable to use the internet for seeking help, depending on which class they belong, which was again very seriously discussed in the last session. The advanced technology has also been used to monitor phone usage of survivors. The survivors have faced the problems of reduced contacts with family support networks. There have also been unavailability of formal support systems, which has increased their stress and anxiety during lockdown. All these problems have increased manyfold due to enhanced workloads, scarce resources, and economic distress in the period. The seminar has also focused on best practices and strategies undertaken globally, where joint efforts made by national governments, women's commissions, lawmakers, policymakers, law enforcement agencies, feminist resource groups, civil society organizations, NGOs, service providers, women's studies centers, gender and sexuality centers, and researchers and activists in the field have played a very important role and which has been of immense importance. Speakers have cited the importance of gender justice by focusing on how structural inequality in the quote-unquote private sphere of home impacts the gendered structure and functioning of economic, political, and social institutions. There have been many important measures taken in terms of creating newer and safer channels for communication for women who are being subjected to violence. Helplines, WhatsApp numbers, mass telecalling, telecounseling facilities have come to the help of people in distress, and even distress call centers have been launched. The need for having legal aid 24/7 and developing spaces at grassroots level to address such issues have been emphasized, along with creation of advocacy spaces through workshops and events like the one we are having today. The urgency of building, archiving, and partnering with individuals and organizations to bridge gaps between theory and practice, laws and its implementation has been re-established. There have been recommendations that national responses to COVID-19 should include a strong message from law enforcement agencies such as the police and the justice actors that impunity will not be tolerated. It further becomes imperative to declare a response to gender-based violence as essential and emergency service. So victims or survivors must also be supported to access comprehensive health services during the lockdown, particularly and thereafter. I mean, that's the lesson we also learned from the whole pandemic period, particularly since they suffer from injuries as a result of the violence they face. Close collaboration with civil society organizations can go a long way in ensuring gender-sensitive response and support services. I will try and focus a bit on the issue of domestic violence, which I feel is a very important part in the whole issue of concept of shadow pandemic. Globally, 243 million women and girls aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual and/or physical violence perpetrated by an intimate partner in the last year. This increase in cases is not just limited to developing countries, but these kind of violence has affected the most advanced countries having the best health resources as well. In India, according to the National Crimes Bureau Report 2018, domestic violence figures as a top category of crimes against women and others from minority sexualities. The difference between domestic violence and other forms of violence is that domestic violence occurs within the framework of intimate relationships in a situation of dependency. This makes reporting and access to legal aids and other support services difficult for the aggrieved. In case of matrimonial disputes, for example, women who are seen to challenge familial authority face social prejudice and hostility, not only from the marital family members and larger community, but also from their natal family members. This, added with lack of financial and infrastructural resources, pushes them towards destitution. However, India has had strong legislations to prevent violence against women and especially against women starting right from the decade of the 1980s. One of the laws providing a comprehensive definition to domestic violence against women and ensuring that women have access to homes and claims to maintenance and right to custody over children is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, PWDVA, which was enacted in 2005 and brought into force in 2006. It is a civil law which prioritizes protection of women over punishment of perpetrator. It locates the aggrieved women in a wider political, social, and economic context so that she can assert her rights as a citizen of the country and not merely as a woman in the family. The law further widens the scope of domestic violence from mere husband-wife struggles to include violence that affects all women in domestic relations. The Act has been viewed by many as a radical view of legislation because it brings the politics of rights into the home. The Act also chooses a multi-agency response to domestic violence because there are services of protection officers, service providers who can act as mediators between aggrieved women and the legal system, and also for providing shelter, legal aid, medical aid, and financial assistance to the aggrieved. An exception is thus made in the law to bridge formal law and informal mediation. These accommodations in the law have been possible because of the long and intense movements worldwide to make domestic violence a common and quote-unquote public concern, and also to point to the important mediations between customary, informal, and formal legal mechanisms. I will share a few thoughts here from the research that we at the School of Women's Studies had conducted on the implementation of PWDVA, but before the lockdown. The challenges and shortcomings in the implementation seem relevant and will be important to reflect upon and share on this platform. Why is it, and why I say that all the more, that why is it that despite such a strong law having been enacted way back in 2005, we have still been unsuccessful in combating domestic violence? Why are we still not ready with infrastructural support for aggrieved women? A question which has really come to haunt us during the pandemic. During our research, we had found inadequate funding, infrastructural inadequacies, lack of training of personnel involved in the legal framework, lack of coordination and communication between different stakeholders and bodies, the problem of overburdened courts as major impediments to the implementation of the PWDVA. We had conducted this study in actually 7 districts of West Bengal, and I'm just trying to share my thoughts based on that study. And we had also noticed that how the construction of the quote-unquote legitimate in marriage becomes a very important factor in determining limits of tolerance, which, as I call it, for a sufferer of domestic violence. Because social norms and legal regulations are mutually constitutive in constructing the quote-unquote legitimate in marriage, just having a law on domestic violence is not enough. For example, we know dowry is illegal, and we still see how dowry debts prevail and how the act of demanding money or valuables from the bride's family persists and even results in death of women. So as several narratives highlighted in our research, accessing a favorable law by women was itself looked upon with great suspicion. She often became a subject of ridicule, both in the family as well as a larger community. And this was despite the fact that accessing law is usually the last resort for such women. Before filing a legal complaint, aggrieved women usually sought help from different quarters, which included natal families, neighbors, political party office, local clubs, Mahila Samitis, NGOs working on domestic violence, and etc. Moreover, we found that there was a problem of lack of awareness of laws. So how they find the legal, these were women who were not aware about laws and who would find the legal system quite alienating. As well as they were anxious about, how many years this whole legal case is going to run. So there were all these hesitations. So one doesn't go to the court, or one doesn't go to the police station, or doesn't go to the protection officer or a service provider the moment domestic violence starts. Complaint, a legal complaint especially, comes much, much later. It therefore seemed to us that women facing domestic violence actually could become better, which I call managers of violence, with the help of such laws, because they learn to cope with daily violence maybe more strategically. But we were definitely not being successful in eliminating violence with the help of these laws. So I will basically try and conclude by reiterating a few issues and questions that I'm sure most of them must have been discussed throughout the day. But just to kind of some food for thought for taking back home with us. Can individual women be protected from domestic violence without simultaneously bringing about fundamental change in gender relations in the family? And I say this specifically with respect to PWDVA. How do rights operate within familial situations and relations? Why is the act of a woman suffering from domestic violence and thereafter seeking professional and legal help to fight for her rights looked upon with so much of suspicion? Do we at all, or do we even respect the right of a woman to lead a life free from violence? Why do such women become an object of ridicule in the family as well as the larger society? If the practical situation of aggrieved individuals filing a complaint against their family members is not seen as a legitimate act, how do such people counter violence in the first place? What are the factors that set the limits of tolerance for aggrieved women? Can we talk about a vision of home as a shared space and residential rights without a shared ownership? How can we then imagine the domestic differently? We know how the social sanction of violence within marriage prevents aggrieved women to take recourse to law in marital disputes. These questions kind of are kind of questioning this basic premise. The everyday violence that survives in conjugality is because we somewhere accept that violence is an enduring aspect of
has increased instances of gender violence within the household and has exacerbated gender inequality. As the effect of these rolls through societies and economies across the globe, gendered impacts of the pandemic should be explicitly addressed. Our meaningful and thought-provoking interactions today try to shine light on the inequitable gendered practices that have negatively impacted the vulnerable genders in our society. Understanding gender violence in this society requires comprehension of tradition, gender, and culture in the country. India has taken significant strides towards protecting and enhancing the rights of weaker genders. Gender justice systems have adapted themselves and worked to ensure rights. Support service systems have adapted and responded to the needs of survivors. Multiple innovative responses have emerged during the pandemic. Yet, beyond these very powerful executions, there exists a disparity between those who can avail of these services and those who face obstacles in availing these services owing to their position in society. The poor, the disempowered, and the vulnerable must be brought into the fold. Access to justice services for vulnerable genders are vital, and judicial systems must continue to be responsive. With virtual access to courts and continued protection through extension of judicial orders, it is vital to support more channels to access by collaborating with community-based grassroots organization and non-lawyer legal assistance initiatives. The private sector has an important role to play here to address gender-based and domestic violence, especially because the remit of the workplace has now opened, provide alternative safe spaces, and further broaden the type of support services that are available. Steps must be taken to strengthen and increase the response capacity of already existing support programs. Vulnerable genders should be kept at the center of the pandemic response. There must be a transformation of gendered economic discriminations. The future requires the formulation of socio-economic plans that intentionally focus on the lives and futures of the vulnerable genders. Through platforms such as today's webinar, public conversations must ensure that the shadow pandemic is brought to light. It must be acknowledged as a major human rights violation. The shadow pandemic of gender-based violence must be treated with the same severity and the same determination as seen in the measures taken to fight against COVID-19. And all that, thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Brief note about this program. By a brief synopsis of the lectures, you have clearly explained the theme of our program. Thank you, sir, for being with us. By this, we end our valedictory session. We have come to the very end of this enriching webinar. On behalf of Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobish Mahavidyalaya, I, Dr. Kamala Mitro, Coordinator of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, would like to take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to all those who have directly and indirectly contributed towards making this Indian Council of Social Science Research Eastern Regional Center sponsored one-day virtual seminar titled Decoding the Shadow Pandemic, a virtual seminar on understanding the complex issue of gender violence amidst lockdown, a success. At the outset, I thank the Director of Eastern Regional Center of Indian Council of Social Science Research, Professor Shoibal Kaur, for sanctioning our proposal requesting funds for organizing this webinar as this gave us the opportunity to host a webinar of this scale and enabled us to provide a platform for much needed discussion on this socially relevant issue. I would like to thank all the staff members of Eastern Regional Center of Indian Council of Social Science Research for their unstinted support in helping us organize this webinar. I convey my regards and hearty thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of West Bengal State University, Professor Bashuk Chaudhuri, for always being our pillar of motivation. I am thankful to the director of our governing body, Mr. Tapush Roy, and all the members of the governing body for their constant support. I would like to thank our respected principal, Dr. Shamul Kormokar, for being a constant source of inspiration and encouragement. I would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to our distinguished keynote speakers, Dr. Girija Borkar and Dr. Jane Pillinger. We are truly enlightened with your knowledge and humbled by your presence. I thank our distinguished resource persons for session 1, Professor Mary John, Miss Ruchira Goswami, and Professor Rukmini Sen, and our distinguished persons for session 2, Miss Shushmita Mukherjee and Dr. Anindita Chatterjee, for taking time out of our busy schedule and enriching us with your thought-provoking lectures. We are truly humbled by your presence. I would now like to thank Ms. Shreyashi Sharma, Ms. Neil Sengupta, and the representatives from Nazaria for sharing with us innovative strategies and best practices with regard to the shadow pandemic. I would also like to express my gratitude to Dr. Nandita Banerjee Dhawan for accepting our invitation as special guest for the valedictory session and for delivering her valedictory address. We are all inspired by your great words. I extend my hearty thanks to the faculty members of the Computer Science Department of Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobish Mahavidyalaya for providing the perfect logistic support and technical guidance. I would like to extend my gratitude to AAD Engravings and Shadav Enterprise for helping us with digital and print content. As we all know that an event such as this cannot happen overnight, the wheels of the planning start rolling weeks ago. Convener of Women's Cell, Dr. Shreyashi Chatterjee, had worked hard to give this beautiful shape of this webinar. My heartiest thanks to Dr. Chatterjee. Now I would like to extend special thanks to the organizing committee members and invitee members of the Women's Cell for their unflinching support and coordination. A special thanks also to all teaching and non-teaching staffs of Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobish Mahavidyalaya for their unwavering support. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants for their enthusiastic participation. On behalf of the Women's Cell and the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobish Mahavidyalaya, I would like to say that we will be organizing more such events in the near future, and we hope we will get the same enthusiastic response from all of you. I would again like to mention that we are extremely grateful to all resource persons. We thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitro, our IQAC coordinator. She has been our anchor of support. I would also take this opportunity to thank everybody else from my institution who helped me co-host this, beginning with Dr. Shukanto Dash, Dr. Alpona Rai, Miss Isha Biswas, Dr. Shomdatta Ghosh, Miss Nandita Bhomik Chaudhuri, Mr. Devaduti Kormokar, and Dr. Navanita Basu for co-hosting the event with me. And again, a big thank you to our respected principal, Dr. Shamal Kormokar, and Dr. Kamala Mitro for ending this And with this, today we end our session. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Jai Hind.